You know that passage of scripture where Jesus said it was easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter God's kingdom? Well, some Christians have come up with this story that there was actually a gate in ancient Jerusalem called the Eye of the Needle, and that camels could squeeze through it if they just unloaded any of the baggage on their backs first. This interpretation is all over the place. I remember hearing it preached in multiple sermons growing up, and it's completely wrong. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, the resident nerd and Bible scholar here at the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. This interpretation has been floating around for about 1,000 years now, going back likely to Anselm in the 11th century. But here's the thing, that's still 1,000 years after Jesus and the writing of the New Testament, and there is zero archaeological evidence that such a gate ever existed. None. And even if it did exist, think about this logically with me. The camel could just get all of its stuff back on its back on the other side of the gate. How would that help the point of Jesus' story at all? In order to get into heaven, you just need to temporarily give up your riches and get them all right back as soon as you walk through the door? That doesn't fit his point. We have turned Jesus' intentionally shocking statement into just humble yourself a little bit and you'll be good to go. But that's not what he said. Jesus said it is hard in this passage, not impossible, hard for rich people to be part of God's kingdom. And the disciples were astonished out of measure by this statement. They were shocked, and we should be too, because guess what? We are the rich ones in this story. I don't care if you don't feel rich. Compared to an itinerant rabbi from the first century who said that he had nowhere to lay his head, you're loaded. We all are. This passage isn't about some wealthy people over there. It's about us. And that makes us uncomfortable because we're used to seeing ourselves as the heroes of the Bible stories, right? We like to put ourselves in the roles of the main characters, not in the roles of the ones getting called out. And so we have misinterpreted this passage because it makes us so uncomfortable. I think part of the difficulty here as well is that we see Jesus talking about the kingdom of heaven, and we automatically think that that means going to heaven when you die. But the kingdom of heaven was more than that in the Jewish imagination of Jesus' time. It was about a restored Eden. And when Jesus talks about being saved, that word saved in the Bible doesn't automatically mean salvation from sin, ticket into heaven kind of thing like we often preach. Salvation in Scripture just at its very core means deliverance. And that can be deliverance in a justification sense, but it's often deliverance in a sanctification sense, how you grow as somebody who already believes in God. Many of the passages in Scripture where Jesus talks about deliverance or salvation, he is talking to people who already believed in Yahweh, people that we would say are saved, to use Christian terminology. And in this passage where he's talking to this rich young man or rich young ruler, depending on the gospel that you're in, he already clearly believed in Yahweh. He said that he was following all of these commandments from his youth. He was very serious about his faith. So Jesus' response to him is not about getting into heaven or out of hell, but rather about sanctification. It is about God's presence taking over his life and actually ruling his life. Rich people can get into heaven just fine. What is harder is living like they are not the ones in control anymore. When you have money, you have options. You have security. You have the illusion of self-sufficiency. And God's kingdom doesn't work that way. Here's the uncomfortable truth. I think Jesus did actually expect people to leave everything behind and become itinerant like him. He was an apocalyptic preacher who believed that this current age was about to end and bring about the age which is to come when God restores Eden. Why hold on to possessions when God's kingdom is breaking in immediately? But then the end didn't come. And the church has been wrestling with this ever since. What do we do with Jesus' message when he's talking about the kingdom of heaven is near? In fact, the kingdom of heaven is now, and yet we look around and things seem exactly the same. This is complicated. The church has been wrestling, and I would say unsuccessfully wrestling with this, for 2,000 years. And it's not even just a Christian thing, too. Bible scholar A.J. Levine has pointed out that later Jewish tradition actually forbade people from giving away everything to the poor because then you would be poor yourself, and that wouldn't help anyone because then you would be in need. But here's the thing, when we start using illustrations like that of, well, if I give everything away, well, wouldn't I just become part of the problem too? Well, that's dealing in extremes. And our questions often lean into those sorts of extremes. There is a massive gap between giving up absolutely everything you have and the way that most of us live right now. Honestly, I think that people who sell what they have, give it to the poor, and travel around with as little as possible trying to help others are the ones who are living most like what Jesus originally intended 2,000 years ago. But most of us will never do that. I know I probably won't. And that's part of what we have been wrestling with Christianity, because we like to say that we are still following Jesus, but then we come up against passages like this that either don't get preached in church or get softened to say, oh, it's not as offensive as you really think it is. Well, no, it actually is. And we need to wrestle with, how do we live out apocalyptic teachings like this when the end doesn't come? It's complex, and I certainly can't solve it for you in a short video for social media. But here's what I do know for sure. We should be way less focused on money than we are, especially in our churches, and way more focused on meeting the actual physical needs of our communities, at least if we're going to claim to truly be following Jesus. If you want to be closer to the heart of Jesus, stop obsessing over your church building funds and start asking whose rent you could pay instead, whose medical bills you could cover, whose kids need school supplies. We have gotten so good at making Jesus palatable. We are so scared of being offended by Jesus that we neuter his most challenging teachings because we can't possibly wrestle with the idea that we might disagree with something that Jesus said. But the text itself even says that this statement astonished people. It was meant to be difficult, so let's stop trying to make it easy. Jesus was not giving a geography lesson about Jerusalem's gates. He was making a point about how wealth, something that the majority of his listeners back then didn't have, but the majority of people claiming to follow him in America today do have, becomes a barrier to surrendering control. So here's what we should say instead of claiming that there was some ancient gate that camels could kneel through. Jesus meant what he said in this passage. It is extremely difficult, but not impossible. And if we are honest about our wealth compared to his original audience, this passage is talking directly to us. So let's wrestle with that instead of trying to explain it away. Let difficult passages be difficult, because that's where growth happens.